Morning, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Speaking of Sundara, where I talk about Sundara Dawn of a New Age, my fantasy RPG setting. Apologies in advance, I'm still dealing with the hopefully tail ends of some sick, and things have been a little stressful around here, so hopefully your lead up to the holidays is going better on your end of the screen when you see this. But without further ado, I wanted to get to something kind of exciting and talk about something I haven't touched on before in this particular series of episodes yet. And it's that, at least at time of recording, or earlier in December, for those of you who are seeing it later, of Towns of Sundara. One of my supplements from earlier this year was Deal of the Day on DriveThruRPG, and as a result of the extra viewership that got, it is the first Sundara supplement to hit silver medal status. So that's exciting. And for those not familiar with the medal system on DriveThruRPG, that basically means it's sold at least 100 copies. And far and away more than most of what else is in the setting has done. So I thought I would sit down today. I would talk about what led to the creation of that supplement, what it's like for those who haven't checked it out or aren't sure what they're getting if they actually pay the handful of dollars to get their own, and what I think I might do with things like this in the future for the setting. So beginning at the beginning of, I've mentioned before on this channel that the setting was kind of inadvertently inspired by my publisher giving me an assignment of 10 fantasy villages, which has also been Deal of the Day in the past and is a very popular supplement as far as Azukail Games' catalog goes. But the follow-up that he suggested we do for that was 10 fantasy cities. Obviously, you start with towns, and towns is popular. You want to do something bigger and, following along on that train. And I really, really, really didn't want to just jam a bunch of cities together into one book. I wanted to give them time to breathe because I love urban environments and I don't think they get enough love in fantasy games. And that kind of inadvertently led to the creation of Ironfire, which then sparked the entire Sundara setting as we know it. And after I'd finished the first arc of Cities of Sundara, after I'd done the first arc of Species of Sundara, I kind of wanted something to mark an endpoint, sort of bridge us over from one series to another. And Towns of Sundara was kind of what I settled on. And it was sort of a callback to 10 Fantasy Villages of it used the same format, it provided most of the same information. Excuse me. And for folks who haven't gotten a hold of either of these, it's pretty basic. You have 10 towns within the setting. Each comes with its own map, its own history, places of interest, notable NPCs, and some plot hooks in case you either are just looking for some side quests to do while you're here, or if you're looking for inspiration, you kind of want this particular town to be the center of where your game is going from here on out. And it's a thing I tried to do with most of the Sundara books, because I know that most game masters out there, at least from the comments I seem to get, prefer to run in their own settings. They prefer to do a lot of homebrew. They don't use as many established settings, so I wanted to make sure that Sundara could be used kind of like Lego pieces, of if you find something you like, you could take it and you could use it without having to worry about the baggage of the setting coming with it. But at the same time, it feels a little pretentious to call it this, but it's the best explanation I have. Of I wanted to have that kind of Dark Souls element to it. Of there's the very obvious surface version of what you're getting. And then if you dig a little deeper and you read into the details, you find all of these very fine threads connecting all of the different elements, whether it's the trade agreements mentioned between major cities, or if you do get a copy of Towns of Sundara, you'll see certain towns have relationships not only to each other, but to other parts of the setting that have been mentioned. You'll see little bits of history coming forth. The town of Doton, for example, was one of the major stands against the Fearin Empire, which hasn't really been mentioned up until this point. And so it kind of uncovers another little bit of the recent history of the setting. But what I was hoping to do, once I gave folks all of that information, was I wanted everyone to have a resource that they could use over and over and over again. And not only that, I wanted the towns, much like the cities I'd made previously, to feel like they had come up organically in the setting. I wanted their explanation to feel, while you were reading their history and while you were going through how they've changed and what they've become, that it felt like a real place, that it wasn't just carved out, drawn out, and plopped down in the middle of a map. And that is actually a lot more difficult than a lot of folks who love world building will tell you. And as an example of what I'm talking about, there's a town of Favor. And Favor is a very strange place, even as far as Sundara goes. It has a lot of laws, it has a lot of rules, and a lot of them can feel nonsensical, and they're almost constantly changing. Whether it's things like you can only walk on the right side of the street before sunset, and you can only walk on the left side of the street during night, or whether everyone who leaves their house has to carry a lantern in their left hand. Weird stuff that seems totally nonsensical. Until you read into the history of this particular town, you realize it's built on more or less compacts with the Fae. The mythical history that we get for Favor, who's to say how true it is that their founder was a young man who was very lazy, didn't like to do any work, and one day, a Fae saw him just lounging, with his raft, and put on a glamour and made a bet with him and said, like, I bet you can't build a house before whatever period of time it was using that raft. And the kid was like, I'll take you up on that, sure, just come back in a month, 2 months, a season, whatever it was. And so the Fae, thinking it had just won this bargain, wanders off, comes back. There's an entire house built. Not only that, kid still has his raft. The Fae is confused by this, and so in traditional fairy tale logic, will up the ante of I bet you can't do it again, bet you can't do it again, and this just keeps happening. Until eventually an entire town has been built. And the kid still has his raft. And the fairy is utterly bewildered by this. But every time the individual won a bet, he got another favor from the Fae. And it finally broke down and demanded, how did you do this? And it becomes something of a Ship of Theseus problem of all of the lumber that went into the entire town came from this raft. So he would take off one log one day, put on another log at the other end, and every day he would just keep doing this. And by the time the new log got to the other end, it had been part of the raft long enough. Who's to say it wasn't the raft he was using? And so, enraged but stuck by its word, the Fae left, except when called upon by either the town's founder or others who may or may not know about how to get hold of them. And that's part of the reason they have so many rules, of it's to confuse any creatures who might come in with ill intent, because you need to be a good guest, and that means you need to follow all of the rules. And that's why they're constantly changing. It's why the town is a little screwball. And it sounds like one of those weird little myths of, yeah, sure, that's why your town exists the way it does. But on the other hand, Favor is known for unusual luck. There's a lot of folks who will trade there specifically because good things always seem to happen when they're present. And whenever there is a disaster, whether it's a drought or a famine or a forest fire, something always seems to get in the way and save this one little town. And so it's histories like that sort of lead into that question of how much of this is true, how much of it isn't. How much of it you choose to use as fodder as a game master is entirely up to you. There's no hard right or wrong answer for a lot of these. Another example is the town of Cat's Crossing, and it got that name because it was a trading post, and the owner just got a cat, and the cat had kittens. And then farmers started settling here because it was a place lots of travel came through. People were always looking for food. They were looking for supplies. And so eventually, you got farmhouses. Farmhouses need cats, and so those cats had kittens, and so on and so forth, until the entire town was not overrun with, but was noted for the amount of cats that wandered around. And the cats, of course, started to get a reputation as good luck, because things like famine never came here, it seemed, because they would kill the rats before the rats would eat the grain. It would also keep the town more or less safe from a lot of plague, because the things bearing the disease were being killed off by the cats, so on and so forth. The question of whether or not the cats are genuinely magical, if there is something in the forest that happens to watch out for them and that keeps an eye on anyone who mistreats the cats, who's to say whether or not that's true, but it's a part of the local legend and the local custom. And so that's just a little something you can just throw in with these places. And while I had a lot of fun putting these together, they were a lot of work. I'm not gonna lie on that. But it is a question I had for folks who are reading this, if you made it this far, of, are these the kind of things you'd prefer to see expanded in the setting going forward? Or would you prefer more of the big, grand, sweeping areas like I did with the cities of Sundara? Or would you prefer something like some adventure paths so that you could actually get stuck in and really explore these places with plot going on? Or alternatively, would you prefer something like the Cults of Sundara that I put out that just recently dropped, which is similar to Sellswords of Sundara? I'm just talking about organizations, social clubs, things that fill in those niche gaps in the setting that could be just as useful in any other fantasy game. But leave your comments down below. I read them, I pay attention to them, and so does my publisher. So if a lot of people say they want something, it's much more likely to happen. Give us as many details and specifics as you can. And until next time, happy gaming, everybody.